Welcome, everybody. I'm Bob Marsanich with Glacier HR Services. Today I have Rick Bucheit with me. He builds adaptive guitars. He's had 40 years plus experience in nursing and nursing management, and he is retiring, so we're going to be talking about the challenges of retirement too. What was one of the most interesting or craziest or most difficult scenarios you've ever run into in your experience dealing with nurses?
Well, it's a human industry, and so I do think you get into a lot of peculiarities. You're stirring together people in the most stressful time of their life. They feel vulnerable. They are worried about a family member who's ill or whatever, and so it's really a challenging thing to deal with people in those situations. I think as far as coworker kind of stuff, this is going to sound kind of bad, but I tend to laugh during codes. So someone's heart is stopped,
Okay.
and for some reason, I look around the room, and the things you see are just kind of goofy. Everybody's buzzing and doing things, and somebody in the group whose function maybe is to just record what's going on or whatever is checking out dates on the dressings in the middle of a code, or wiping out the drawer that some of the emergency meds are in. And it's just so weird and odd to see that people deal with that nervous energy differently. Part of mine is I end up kind of chuckling and looking at the crazy, curious part of human nature, but other people are going, hey, good time to clean out this drawer. So
Interesting. Have you ever seen that go too far, and where you've literally had to intervene in the moment to get someone more focused?
yeah, I think that happens. Again, with the stress that's going on, I think the closer you are to that being you or your family member, the harder it can be. And so once in a while you have somebody who just kind of gets overwhelmed or is just kind of staring at what's going on around them, and you need to kind of get them back in the game and paying attention, because their thoughts shift to, oh, what if that's my family member?
Yeah. What about like you were saying, the profession of nursing and it being so human focused, and people that go into nursing? What kind of personality do you find goes into that kind of profession, and what are the pros and cons of it?
I think there are people who really have a strong desire to help others, and that's a very noble thing. But I also think that it tends to be people who lean toward being a little subservient, and probably don't have the best ego strength. And so that means that they tend to be fragile, and it gets to be a very challenging group to manage in that regard.
Could you define ego strength just a little bit for the audience, so they know what you mean?
So ego strength is what we think of ourselves, whether we're confident or not, and sort of our sense of self. And I think that tends to sometimes shoot healthcare providers, and especially nurses, in the foot. So
I'm curious, because I've seen this in almost every industry I work in, is where you have a really, really good technician and you move them into a supervisory role. And the reason for that lots of times is that's the only way to give them a raise. Did you see that in your experience with nursing?
yeah, not so much probably the raise side of it, but just the fact that the assumption is because you're a good technician, you'll be a good manager, and obviously that is not at all the case. It's a lifelong learning process. I was in management for years and years, and one of my mentors gave me a little book called The Courage to Confront, because you've got to find those ways to sometimes be a little blunt and make sure your message is getting through, but in a tactful, respectful way. And that book just kind of helped tune that up for me a little bit, even though I'd been managing for years. But it was probably out of the fact that I was a good technician, therefore I got put into management roles.
Exactly. Well, but how did you take, like, say, a young nurse or maybe even an older nurse but was being moved into management, and they were having trouble, making that role change? How would you work with them to get them to learn the difference between the doing and the managing?
Yeah, and I think that's a skill set that I had to acquire, was how to put things in terms that person could understand, and explain to them what the dynamic was, what they were dealing with people. That, there are three components to any job. There's giving someone a clear understanding what the job is. There's giving them all the tools, both in knowledge and literal tools. And the third one is the person's got to have the willingness and the aptitude to do the job. And sometimes giving them those tools of things like permission. You can pull this person aside as long as you're respectful and deliver a pretty strong message to them. Stay respectful. And sometimes people just don't think of that. Their answer to delivering a strong message is being kind of angry and overly stern. And it doesn't have to be that, but you need to be able to, as a new manager, have the permission to pull that person aside, not necessarily go check with your boss and see if it's okay if you talk with them, and then be able to deliver a very direct message.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I've been working a lot with one of the companies I work with around permission, and sort of discovering at this late stage in my career how important permission is. That I think a lot of times organizations, like you're saying, don't give people the permission. Like I was just working with this group about, if you're in a meeting, you have the permission to help manage the meeting, and I think people don't understand that, or they don't hear that. But once you have permission, then you can do something, but without the permission, you're always hesitant to take a stand or move forward. Do any stories come up in your mind about that permission and how important it is, or a specific of where you had to communicate it to someone or help them with it?
I don't know if it's a specific story, but the thing that I've noticed over the years is that people take that concept of permission and they apply it differently. Mm-hmm. Some people, you've just unleashed the dogs. Yeah. I've been given permission, and they kind of run rampant over the meeting. Yeah. And don't really have the perspective. For other people, no matter how many times you tell them they have permission, they still tend to hang back and be respectful, and maybe overly respectful. Yeah. So I see that in people, and it's just people being people, mm-hmm. and the way they interpret the message you're trying to deliver.
So how would you one, I guess, evaluate the difference between those two, and then was there any difference in how you would intervene to get the person that was running rampant to pull back, or the person that was holding back to move forward?
Yeah, and I think it can be challenging during the meeting. I think that the thing to do is recognize those tendencies early, and then at a quiet time say, I noticed that you leaned a little bit heavy into, taking over this meeting, and I want you to stop and think and kind of watch and be conscious of the room. Yeah. Yeah. And then I think you craft them, and it's probably harder to take the person who tends to stay very subservient mm-hmm. and obedient and push them out of their shell than it is to pull someone back. Yep.
Yeah. What you mentioned mentors. What are one or two, like you were saying, the book on courage? What other experiences did you find that were, I guess, like the top two or three transitionary skills you needed to be successful moving from a line position to a supervisory managerial position?
I had a hospital administrator. First name was Pete, a very dynamic, very good guy, but he was also a good teacher and a good leader. And the things that I learned that were most striking were that he always dealt with people with compassion and respect. And I think that's the biggest battle you have. If you can show people that you respect them, you make an attempt to understand where they're at in the process, you're going to have a much better time and a much better relationship. And he was just always the professional, the respectful guy, the patient guy, and that really struck home with me.
Yeah. Interesting. I've always said the best leaders I've ever run into are people that have that compassion and that understanding, but they also have a certain amount of sternness. But probably the most important is they knew when to use each. They knew when to be stern with someone. They knew when to be compassionate and gentle. How about that stern side? How did you learn to do that effectively?
Probably too little, too late. I was always, from the time I was a young nurse, I was always the guy who felt like, gee, people should have a voice in the process. And I probably hung on to that too long.
Okay.
And I think it was seeing the result of not getting the message across because I was not direct enough or whatever, and just learning to hone those skills and find that way to be direct without sounding mean or angry, just direct and professional, but respectful.
Along those lines, because, I hear you talking a lot about self-awareness and you becoming aware of something and realizing you need to make a change or do something. How would you go about creating awareness in others, the people that you were managing? Say someone that wasn't aware that they were, a bull in a china closet in a meeting or whatever. How would you attempt or get self-awareness in someone?
A lot of times I would ask them how they perceived what they did or how they would like to be spoken to, and what kind of a message they would respond best to, because it makes people kind of stop and go, okay, am I doing that when I'm delivering that message to others?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's an excellent way to do it, because it puts the onus of the responsibility on them. Instead of you saying, you're this way, asking them, now suddenly it almost the question itself creates that, or begins to create the self-awareness.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. This might seem as like an odd question, but I've found this over and over again, is that our experiences in one part of our life will overlap or integrate with other parts of our lives. So are there any similarities that you've noticed between building guitars and the management experiences that you've had, or dealing with people versus wood?
I like wood a lot better. It doesn't talk back.
Gotcha. I agree.
I'll tell you an interesting story about nurses, because people being people.
Yeah.
One of my friends pointed out to me that we tend to gravitate toward a subspecialty in nursing. So for years, I ran operating rooms, and her observation was, in the operating room, you have a list of all the things you need to prepare, and those things need to be prepared and ready to go when that person is put under anesthesia, so that you've got the efficiency. They're not under for an unnecessarily long period of time, and you don't get somewhere in a procedure and go, oops, we don't have the blah thing. Yeah. But the way she pointed that out to me, she was an ER nurse.
Okay.
And it was this issue of making nachos. Because I'm making nachos, and being the preparation guy, I'm laying out all the nachos so that they aren't significantly overlapped, and then putting on a very even distribution of grated cheese, and then putting on another layer of non-overlapped chips, and then more cheese. And being a ER nurse, that's a personality type where it's the shortest path from A to B. So I'm doing that, and she dumps 2 handfuls of chips on the plate, cracks a chunk of cheddar off of a brick, sets it on top, puts it in the microwave. But it's just that reflection of how how you approach what you do. And so being that guy who has always had that OCD approach, I think that lends itself to the guitar business because you do have to be very careful and meticulous with what you're doing, everything from the direction of the wood grains and so forth. And so I think there's that similarity in the form of precision, preparation, all that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
ER nurses probably don't make the best guitar makers.
Yeah. Gotcha. The chunk of cheese doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Rick, I want to change things a little bit, and I want to talk about, some of your realizations about, the similarities or differences between guitar building and management. And, the audience hasn't heard this yet, but just briefly, that you build guitars and you build adaptive guitars. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and why you want the adaptive guitars?
I noticed that I've got a couple of friends who have played an instrument for a very long time, 50, 60 years. And it doesn't matter what instrument, but there's the issue of repetitive motion injury. And so people who always have their wrists, elbows, fingers in certain positions, you tend to wear out those joints. And so what I noticed was that even people that I knew who had very careful, impeccable technique got to a point where there was painful playing. And so I looked at that and said, I want to find a way to see if I can adapt the instrument so that the positions that they use are positions that relieve their pain a little bit.
Okay, interesting. So just to back up a little bit, how did you move from nursing to that?
I think I'd always worked on guitars.
Oh, okay.
I've got guitar bodies that I built right out of high school. And so it's always been there. It kind of took a back seat to raising family and so forth, but it was always something I was interested in. And I think that the management thing is so dynamic and you've got to be pretty measured and careful. Sometimes you can't speak your mind and need to employ those therapeutic techniques. And so when I would get home, the fact that I could just go ahead and run my shop, there's no management involved. There's also no dynamics in the context of other people coming in and saying, you need to change the wood. I just cut this wrong. So I gravitated toward that because it was a kind of a peaceful thing.
Okay.
So it was more of a relief from the stress of the management job.
Okay. So you if I have this right, you also went from nursing management into building guitars, and it was sort of a partial retirement move. Is that?
Yeah, I started several years before retirement, thinking that I was going to have some time on my hands. I had always wanted to craft guitars and get into some sort of a cottage business around guitars, and so I started to build more and experiment with what I was doing, and part of that was just trying to position myself so that I could have someone play a variety of guitars that feel a little different.
Okay.
So they could say, I don't have pain when I play this one. And so that's what I set out to do while I was still working, and then, applied that as I got into retirement.
Okay. Interesting. How would you define coming up with that idea of adaptive guitars? Did it just sort of hit you one day, or had you been thinking about it? And
I was always interested in the different construction techniques and the feel of different guitars, and I think that made me aware of some options that were out there, and also ask, why does one feel different? Why does one feel more comfortable than the other? And so, then can I build those, and can I take that a step farther? If I see a quality that I think is helpful to someone, can I take that to a little more of a degree, and does that help or not?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So just to, I guess, analogies again, is it almost sounds like the work with the guitars and the adaptive guitars and saying, okay, can I take this to another degree, or can I move this far, is a little bit like working with the people, right? Where you have someone and it's like baby steps. They may not be able to get here where I want them, but if I can get them to here and then to here and then to here, we'll get there. Does that fit for you?
Yeah, and I think by virtue of the fact that I am designing guitars in my head, there's the personality and the overall workflow, the culture of a facility, and so maybe you can't take an individual person and move them a great degree all at once. But there's an issue of their personal growth, but there's also an issue of the overall culture of the group.
Yep.
And maybe you can move the group by leading them all toward a little higher standard or whatever, and then that starts to move those people closer to where you need them to be.
So tell me a little bit about the challenges, as you move from nursing to building guitars and retirement. What were some of the challenges you faced with retiring?
I found it interesting when I moved to Missoula because I'm from the East Coast originally, and almost everybody there is very focused on get a 40-hour-a-week job, work full-time, do a good job for your employer, get invested in the company, that sort of thing. And I move here, and I've got a very high percentage of the nurses that work in the operating room who say, just work 2 days a week. That's all I want to do. And so that was really strange for me to come into that environment, because it was so different from what I was used to. And it's a personal life decision.
Sure.
Some people say I can get by on the earnings from 2 days a week, and I want to hike. I want to experience things.
Yeah. What were the challenges for you when you? I mean, did you end up with having too much time or not enough, or?
Not enough. I became a workaholic.
Okay.
And so most of my work weeks were 60 to 70 hour weeks. There was a point in time where I had a self-inflating camp mat and a fleece sleeping bag in my office.
Okay.
And would stay overnight and work till 3 a.m, and the housekeeper would wake me up when she came to take my trash out at 6 a.m, and I'd get up and go brush my teeth and start my day.
Okay.
And I think then moving into retirement, that because my approach was 40 hours a week, always work full time, it really was who I was, and so it was hard to move into retirement and not be the nurse or nurse manager anymore.
Yeah.
So that's been quite the adjustment.
I bet. Boy, I bet. So I've always heard that it's better to retire to something versus from something. Do you feel like you've retired to something, like the making the guitars, or is it different?
When you just started that statement, immediately my mind jumped to two things, because in some ways I probably did retire from something. I was at a point where I really don't like where the subspecialty of nursing I was in is going overall. And so there was a little bit of retiring from something.
Yeah.
But also I had the guitar business that I was interested in building. And so I did have something to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And you're still doing some nursing, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I pick up a shift or two a week at a couple places just to kind of keep my hand in and make a little spending money.
So kind of a couple of questions. What have you seen as the major changes in nursing over the last 40 years?
Uh, well, the acuity always goes up. So I think that's been a never-ending process. People who 40 years ago were closely observed in a hospital bed are now people that go home, and the people who used to be closely observed in a hospital bed are now in a step-down unit or a long-term care facility. So the acuity,
Okay.
tends to go up
Yep.
over time.
Yep.
And I think as far as the profession, I think nurses used to get into healthcare because mom was a nurse. There are nurses in my family. The old saying was kind of that if you're a female, at least, you're going to be a teacher or a nurse, because those are the professions
Yeah.
that we gravitate to. I think that there was a certain amount of dedication that came with that, pride in being a nurse, and being from maybe a family or a long line of nurses. Today's nurses I see being more interested in the tech side of things,
Oh.
and I guess taking it to a higher degree, from the standpoint of all the techie stuff.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like better, the management or just straight nursing?
I still like the management piece of it,
Okay.
but probably not at the level that I was at
Yeah.
as an executive director.
Yeah.
That got pretty heavy.
Do you ever find yourself going, geez, this place needs some better management?
Yeah, I think you have some of that, and one of the things that I would probably do that I would sort of craft where I'm at is if I had the opportunity to be a clinical educator. I've got a lot of good experience
Yeah.
just as a nurse, and I think that I've got a good way to illustrate for young nurses. Okay, think about it this way, and do the clinical education piece. That satisfies my need to make improvements in a system and make things better.
Yeah.
But it's done in a way that's not so heavy from the standpoint of I'm going to make policy that's going to live on for
Yeah.
years, and is it the right policy or isn't it?
Yeah.
You know.
What would you say to a young person that's trying to decide whether their makeup or personality is for nursing and they'd be successful in nursing? What would be one or two qualities you absolutely have to be successful as a nurse?
I think it's the caring, and I think you have to have a strong drive to be professional and independent, because you're often not so directly supervised, but you need to be looking at your patients and deciding what it is that they need, taking the initiative to take action on those things.
Okay. What advice would you give, one or two points, to the nursing manager?
I would say try to learn that management aspect. Pick up a couple of the books on management, 7 Habits,
Yeah.
The Courage to Confront, some of those things, and educate yourself, and not just in management techniques, but that self-reflection piece.
Okay. Yeah. How important do you think that self-reflection piece is?
I think it's extremely important. I think that if people just plow along and have an objective and don't stop to assess their impact on other people, I don't think you can be as successful. I think you have to kind of read the room and know where you're at with things. I think it's the only way you can deliver a good, strong message and lead people.
Yeah.
So it's really important to do that.
Yeah. All right. All right. Anything that you want to talk about that we missed, or?
No, I just think it's been interesting talking with you because, you'll say something that spurs some thoughts in my head, and I probably look at things from a little more global level than some people. That issue of self-awareness and how it impacts the work environment. The fact that you've got to read other people's self-awareness and their ego strength to really be effective at what you're doing.
Yeah. No, I really like that concept that I haven't thought of in those terms, of that idea of ego strength, and just how important that is, especially for a supervisor, because if they're insecure, they don't have the confidence, or they're trying to prove themselves, they're constantly running over the top of other people, or, making interventions that don't make sense, or belittling people in front of other people. And then they not only have one problem, lack of performance of the employee, they have another problem of their own approach to stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's really hard. I find so many people who sort of get very concrete in their thinking process, and I think that's really got to go away. My wife and I talk about that all the time. People that are very concrete thinkers, you really have to adapt and roll with the punches. And I think when people are insecure, they're more likely to defend their position, not go, maybe it could be a little bit that way. You know?
So if someone that like you were saying, is learning to play guitar, has been playing guitar, but is realizing, geez, this repetitive movement, I could end up with a problem years from now. They could literally come to you and say, hey, Rick, can you help me, design, and they'd play, and you'd watch, and you'd be able to say, okay, here's some stuff that we can change on the neck or on whatever to make it easier for you to play, and plus prevent some of the repetitive movement problems.
Yeah, and I've got a prototype that's being built specifically for beginners, and it should allow people to get into playing without such painful finger motions. So I've got two strategies. The short-term strategy is addressing repetitive motion injuries in people in the present, but the long-term strategy is to have people look ahead and say, I'm going to employ those techniques as a young player, or I'm going to buy my grandson a guitar that has that playability, in the hopes that when they've been playing for 40 or 50 years, they don't have repetitive motion injuries, because a lot of what I do can take the stresses off of all those joints while you play.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It just hit me now as I'm realizing that the adaptive guitars is directly related to nursing in terms of healthcare and preventing injury and a healthier lifestyle 40 years from now.
Yep. And that's the long range goal.
So, that's so cool.
I would like to see that be something that people pay attention to.
Yeah, that's so interesting. How just real quick, are you aware of anyone else doing something like this?
Yeah, they're in big metropolitan areas. There are some people that do that, and they've got a team like an occupational therapist, because occupational therapy is more small joint adaptive, and so there are people that are doing some research on that.
I got to tell you, you're the first I've ever heard of it, and I think it's so fascinating to do that concept and to have the skill and ability to do it. And my guess is, some of your experience from nursing and repetitive motion, or in industry and management, my background with wood products industry, just how important repetitive motion is, and with some knowledge, you can prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Yep.
Very neat. Yeah. All right. Well, Rick, I want to thank you. And if you would, could you tell people what your YouTube site is for adaptive guitars?
Yeah, it's Dr. B's Guitars, and right now we're just mainly doing shorts. I'm also doing some shorts on Facebook, also under the same name, and so that'll be what we're going to try and build, and make offerings that help people be able to craft exactly what they want. And that's probably the management side of me a little bit, is what I'm doing is making a guitar where just like a car, you can pick the options that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And build from a very basic neck all the way to a complete guitar and all the little bells and whistles in between.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening, and Rick, I especially want to thank you for your dialogue and insights, and especially around the nursing and the repetitive motion stuff and the adaptive guitars.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
You bet.